Are we good? See me out fiddling with the knob. You okay? All right, well, see Doc up today. Welcome everybody to HQ Bar here in beautiful Long Valley Beach in Song. Hello. Okay, I'm back. My name is Steve Feldman. I'll be the host / moderator / referee for tonight's event. And what is tonight's event? Well, for a few hours, we're going to put away the guitars and the beer pong and the football matches on the telly. But we're not going to put away the scotch and the beer. That is still available. What we're going to replace them with is something that hopefully will stimulate just as many brain cells as will later destroy with alcohol. We have 3 of the finest typewriter jockeys on the peninsula down here, and all 3 of them have recently published books that not only will you hear them talk about, you can also purchase this evening. Is that right? They're all available? Yes. And if you're nice, they might actually sign them. Even if you're not nice, they'll probably sign them. Our 3 guests have he's been a language instructor, lecturer, and journalist, including 6 years as a feature writer for the Koreabridge. He's written 10 books for both fiction and nonfiction. 39 about North Korea. Hold it up. Right. Currently, he lectures on English and history at Koreabridge International School of Business in Beijing. More about him and his books and whatever's on his mind on a given day, and his website, Jeffery Miller Writes. Next, to my right, is Michael Breen. He's been a writer and a correspondent in Korea beginning in 1982. He's written for The Guardian and The Times in the UK, The Washington Times in the US, and The Korea Times here in Korea. In 1998, he published The Koreans, Who They Are, What They Want, Where Their Future Lies. And it seems to be such a smash hit. We call it a smash hit? Sure. It inspired sequel, recently published this year, called The New Korea, The Story of the Nation. Thanks for coming down here. Charlie, John Bocskay, has lived in South Korea since 1998. He was the author of the newly published Culture Shock, Korea, Survival Guide and Customs and Etiquette. His articles on Korea have appeared in the Korea Times, Busan Apps, Strikes Korea, Uche Shinbu, and is currently the editor and main contributor to the Korea Fixed blog, formerly known as Steve Feldman Forum, of which I'm very proud to be a contributor. Thanks for setting this up, John. So I'm going to address the first question, I guess, to the author closest to me, Mr. Miller. You and all the writers here have written about South Korea for many years. Obviously, you are not native to South Korea. You are all from other places, other countries, other hemispheres. What would you say are the biggest challenges or pitfalls about writing about South Korea, and how have those challenges changed over the multiple decades that you lived here?
I think one of the challenges that I faced as a writer is trying to define who my audience is. Because for many expat writers, we want to write about our experiences in South Korea. So when I'm writing, I'm always trying to think of my audience in terms of who they are and what do they know about Korea. I mean, most people, when they think about Korea, South Korea, North Korea, of course, they're thinking about the Korean War, thinking about the ongoing sort of confrontation between North Korea and the U.S. and Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. So it's always a matter of trying to find that niche audience, or trying to sort of help to explain to whatever audience it might be, what it's like living in Korea and sort of writing about the things that I do. So that's one of my challenges as a writer.
I think mine's slightly different. My audience, my audience, the reader I have in mind when I write books is an expat who has some experience in Korea, or and the type of thing, the approach I take, I want people to think, oh, that happened to me. Well, yeah, I know that. Actually, I haven't thought of that for a long time. Well, that's the explanation. So the audience is so fixed, the reader is fixed in the mind. The problem, I think the biggest challenge for me over the years has been Korean language. Actually, two things. One is Korean language, because I'm ashamed to say, although I feel I'm probably a good company, that I'm sort of functionally illiterate in this society. I've only learned enough Korean for what I need to do. And I can read Korean, but it takes me sort of half a day to get through a page, so I don't bother. So I'm sure there's a lot of there is a wealth of information out there about what I'm writing about that I can't access. And connected to that problem, it's a slightly different one. I'm sure you've all had this experience where, when you live here, you sort of feel this place is kind of the center of the world. You feel really important. Then when you go home, or when you even go nearby in the region, Hong Kong places, you find it's not that well known. And Koreans sometimes do things, like 1 million people come out on the street and protest and impeach the president, and you also feel befuddled, thinking, well, why did that just happen? And I think, in my experience, I've had some reporting experience in other countries, like Indonesia, places like that, and I found there that you can immediately go to people, they will explain things to But I've always found in Korea that Koreans themselves are not very good at explaining some of the things going on in their country to foreign audiences. So you end up trying to figure it out yourself. So I think those have been my two main challenges.
Please hold your applause to the end. You can applaud whenever you want.
I'm also, I count myself among the people who struggle with language as well as an obstacle towards a lot of the things I would like to do as a writer, through accessing information and just being as comfortable in Korean as I am in English. So you're not alone. I'm definitely one of those. For me, the big challenge with this book is because this is a guidebook, and my aim was to try to explain Korean culture in a way that would be useful to someone who's coming here to live, so more like a practical guide to culture, if I can put it that way. So the challenge for me was just trying to, number one, to describe the country in broad strokes, which is hard enough, I think, when you're writing about any country, if you want to get it right. But I think, especially with a country like Korea, which is so dynamic and changes so much, my fear that I would submit my manuscript, and by the time it hit the shelves, it would already be like half out of date. I submitted my manuscript, and about a week later, the president was impeached. He probably had the same problem. I got an email from my editor saying, "Oh, there's still a little time before it goes to the printer. You want to say something maybe about that?" Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. So I added a little bit at the end, mentioning that. So that was my fear. That you just don't. You want it to be. You have to accept that it's going to be out of date, probably pretty quickly. Michael, you've written an update. You set out to write an update, if I understand, but you ended up writing an entirely new book. And I think that's kind of was a challenge for you.
Sort of to follow up on this question of audience, most of your work seems to be intended for English speakers, expats, or even people back home. No doubt, at some point, at some level, Koreans become aware of your work, read it. I'm wondering, we live in the age of political correctness and cultural appropriation, seems to be a hot term these days. Have you ever run into any problems about people asking, look, how can you write about Korea because you are not Korean? Or because you are a foreigner? I wonder, how is your work received, and what kind of feedback you've gotten from Koreans about your work?
Generally, as I write, I don't really write for Koreans, number one. So Koreans who come to me and say, "Oh, I want to read this book," and the first thing I say, after thank you, is, I didn't really write it for you. Because I'm really trying to explain, how to live in Korea and adapt to Korea. If you're Korean and you haven't done that by now, I really can't help you. But there is a curiosity. A lot of Korean colleagues and friends, they want to know kind of how foreigners see Korea. They're interested in kind of a foreign take on Korea. How does Korea appear through my eyes and the eyes of other foreigners? So I get a lot of curiosity. The book has just come out. I don't know that none of my friends have read it, but the reaction to some of my past work has been positive. In general, not only the book, but a lot of my other short pieces have been toward the same end, which is trying to just sort of demystify Korea, make it a bit easier for people to live here. When I tell Koreans that's what I do, they go, "Oh, good, please, more of that." People keep doing that. So it's been fairly positive in my experience.
Mine slightly different one of the best compliments I ever had from a Korean was when I wrote my first book a few years ago now. One Korean, a well-known Korean journalist, he read it, it was translated into Korean. This one's being translated into Korean now. I might be able to answer that question next year, but this journalist said to me, when I read your book, I felt naked. And I took that as a compliment. even though he was conveying something a little bit uncomfortable. And I think it's because with my background as a journalist, you tend to be quite rude, or you're very critical. So I'm very aware that I might upset you. By and large, I've been outing. Well, yeah. I found that to my face, my writing has been well received. Funny enough, since we may talk later about Park but I've written a few articles in a few columns in Korean and international papers about that, and I've got a lot of very positive emails, but they're from a sector of society that I don't feel that I actually relate to very well. It's more the people on the right who are waving flags and saying it's all a North Korean plot, and they feel that I'm sort of doing a good job for them. So that's important. The negativity, this thing you were alluding to, I mean, profit appropriation probably isn't quite right. It's not exactly turning something that belongs to Korea into something that it shouldn't be. It's more, and this is something I've seen in online commentary, and I've found that it comes from Korean Americans or overseas Koreans. It's who is this guy in here? What does he know about Korea? And if they're actually saying, I don't really relate to a foreigner writing about my culture that I grew up in, if I do live in the States, then I understand it. Because you have to, when you read a book, it's like you're going on a journey with an author, you have to feel comfortable with it. If you don't relate to them, then that's fine. That's a judgment that anybody can make. But I do object to the more extreme expressions of that. I've had some comments like, what right, who gave this guy the right to, there's no such thing as some people have the right to write about a book. We write, there's a marketplace, so there's a right speaking it out. So I've had some unpleasant commentary, but nothing to say. Maybe tonight,
Well, as for myself, I think what John is saying, most of the people who have read, actually I've written 2 books about Korea. One was on the Korean War, and my current one. And from students and colleagues, my Korean colleagues, they're always surprised at what I know about Korea that they don't know. Things that I might have discovered on my own, things that I might have come across. So they feel a little bit embarrassed that I'm actually writing about history that they don't know much about. So maybe that's good for me being able to get back to that question about audience, that there are people who when they read the books of mine, they learn something. So if that's the case, then I've done my job as a writer.
We're going to move on to another question. It's a question I like to ask journalists or reporters, or really any kind of expert on a given place. What aspects or topics of South Korea do you feel are being underreported or overlooked? And why don't we start with Jeffrey?
I would have to say the adoptees, Korean adoptees that were adopted by many countries in the 1950s, 1960s. And one thing which I'm seeing right now, what's happening in the United States with the Dreamer program, is where some of these orphans who were adopted, a lot of the paperwork was lost. And now some of these Korean Americans are growing up and they don't have the documentation. And there's been a few stories about them being deported, coming back to South Korea and being sort of a hoarder in their own land. So this is something I think we're going to see more. I think I'm surprised that it hasn't been covered a lot. So who knows? Maybe the next novel or next something that's going to be written will be about these adoptees, perhaps coming back, searching for their roots, searching to find out, who they actually are. Roots.
Yeah, I think there are certain themes which I think are underreported. One which Jeffery referred to. I think there's not a lot in my mind. We'll come back to that. But one of the things that I'd say is the Korean reporters, writers are slightly different. We go in depth on certain things. Foreign correspondents who report on the country are criticised for not doing certain things better. But a lot of what you learn when you know that country is what is in its own media. Now, the South Korean media has a couple of problems. One of them is that its style of reporting is quite passive. If you look at newspaper structures that journalists write, they tend to write on the basis of press releases which are issued out of government offices and out of Chevron offices. Have a look at even the English language papers, and you see very few stories that are kind of man on the street bottom up. They tend to be articles based on press releases issued from the kind of organizations that issue press releases. And there's not a great deal of investigative reporting. And so I think that is a bit of a problem. So this sort of idea that this, for example, if you take anything over years, like something that emerged in the last sort of 20 years or so, is that to the astonishment of anyone who came to Korea in the 60s, 70s, 80s, early 90s, is Koreans lost interest in North Korea. That sort of thing came out of the rain years after it was happening, out of surveys. Whereas there hasn't been a real investigative reporting culture in the country, you would have learned that much earlier. The other weakness of their system is that they're very, very dependent on Chevron money. If E. J. Young, as he languishes in jail, wakes up tomorrow morning and thinks, all this money that we paid out to journalists, to media over the years, hasn't done me any good, but to me, I'm in jail. What good has it done to me? Because there's so much money, and this is $1 billion a year largesse from the main Chevron and big government organization, goes to sustain media. And I'm not talking about normal advertising. This is unnecessary donation. And for that reason, reporting on the Chevron is very, very weak. Any serious, once a scandal hits, like say the Lotte Group problems recently, the press can't avoid writing about it. But other big things, like a few years ago, the chairman of Samsung was found guilty and given a suspended sentence. Then President Lee went back and pardoned him. That was a one-day news story. There wasn't a single column, single editorial analyzing this, discussing it, saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. No column. In 2 days, it had gone. And that's a consequence of Chevron money sustaining newspapers. So I think Chevron stories are seriously underreported.
Can I just follow up on that? It's very interesting. Of course, the money influence issue probably is a big factor there, but would you describe any other reasons for that? Like, could an independent newspaper, like something I.F. Stone, Reader back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, like not depending on money, or is there some deeper cultural fear of confronting authority in a hardcore journalistic way?
Well, not in confronting authority, because as you can see, this is a very, very feisty democracy. The president is criticized all the time. That I don't think is a problem. I think the problem is economics. Not just the survival of the media itself, journalists do not feel that their role in life is to defend the British economy. And if the government says to them, you know, you should write positively about British companies, then British get laughed at. I dare say the same in the same states. But in this country, journalists have seen their mission as sort of guardians of Korean national interests, and that is often an economic thing. So pounding away at the Chevron might be okay for a day or two, but there's a risk then to the broader economy.
As someone who's not a journalist or reporter, I was thinking it's not so much a question of something that I feel is underreported. I'm more someone who writes about culture. There are a lot more books now coming out about Korean culture than there were even 5 years ago. There's books on K-pop, on food, on all kinds of food. They're very good books. The thing I see, though, it's not so much of a reporting issue. It's more of a cultural one, where this one idea I keep bumping up against, and we were talking about a little earlier, was this idea that, or this assumption, I should say, that in driving to modernize the economy and their country in many ways, that there's an assumption by many Western observers that the goal was to become, in some sense, a Western country, more or less all of the cultural and social and legal particulars. And when they see that not happening, when they see any sort of deviation or difference, it's more seen as like falling short, where the word nearly comes up a lot. I've heard Korea term the land of like nearly or like near missing. In order to say something like that, your assumption has to be that the goal was to become a Western country, where my feeling for a long time has been that that was not the goal, it was never the goal. The goal was to be Korea, and I think, Mike, you nailed it in your book. I was reading this the other day. The goal was just to be better, I think. They were not trying to be another England or another America. They were just trying to be a better Korea, and however they choose to define that. So I find that's an idea that I kind of bump up against a lot in my writing. That's a kind of an idea that I've gone to war with for the past few years. And I find it kind of, it's necessary to keep saying that. I find myself repeating myself. But that was just what came to mind.
Let me just add one thing. I just remember the big when I wrote Jeffery's example was about the adoptee. But there's one that I write about here that really been, I sort of knew it, but kind of never really thought about it. I haven't seen it. I've seen the occasional article, but I'm not serious. And that is that the situation of Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses, they're not a popular sort of buyer religion. Nobody really cares about them. But there are, at any time in South Korea, there are about 600 young men, Jehovah's Witnesses, in jail because they refuse to do military service. And it is a total non-issue. Nobody cares. There's been no effort to sort of adjust what military service is. They basically refuse to pick up a gun because that means learning how to kill people. But in other countries that have military service, like European countries, you can work in hospitals, but there would be other ways to allow this. This country has, I would argue, more freedom of religion, more freedom of religion even than our country, particularly more than European countries, which a lot of them would have state religions and itself. But this country doesn't have that. There is true freedom here, without exception. I find there's almost zero reporting.
That's strange, because I know some of my former high school students have done myriad of different kinds of positions, fulfilling their military obligation that didn't involve guns or formal military training at all.
I think it's that they all have to do boot camp. I think they all have to do it.
But like the Koreans, they do several ways to get out of doing it. They cut off their index finger. You can't pull the trigger, and you're not accepted into the military. So if they allow an exception to the Jehovah's Witnesses, they'll have to allow exceptions for other people. So the only exceptions are the ones under the table, like you mentioned before, where the money is. And all of the others, they can't allow that social exception.
Okay, interesting answers from all of you. Thank you. Let's move on to a simple question about what you are all working on now. What is what's in the works for your next projects? John, why don't you start?
Well, I'll be really brief on this one. Well, I just launched a new blog. I think you mentioned Korea Fix, which is the follow-up to the Steve Nichols blog. It's a focus on Korean culture and books. So that's been my primary occupation this summer, to try to get that up and running. I had a book project kind of on the go before Culture Shock came along, which was not necessarily about Korea. It was more of a oral history about American expats and talking about the reasons they left America, how their sense of national identity evolves. And I'll go back to that at some point. I've been dragging my feet a little bit and busy. I do have a good excuse, but that's been what I've been doing lately.
Okay, my one is, I'm actually done with Korea. What I always wanted to do all my life, when I grow up, I'm going to do it, is to write fiction. And I've never had the courage to do it, but I started a novel. And I started about month. I was planning it out for about 4 months, and I started it about a month ago. And it's an extraordinary experience. I don't want to talk about it too much because I'm very superstitious. When I was a high school student, for our school magazine, I interviewed a very elderly gentleman who was a writer, a local writer, and he said, I said, oh, I want to be a writer as well. He said, here's my one bit of advice. The energy for writing is like steam inside a kettle. It's inside you. If you talk about it, you're letting the steam out. It will come out when you're talking about it. So keep quiet. So I don't really want to talk about it, but I will say one thing I found was I started off this first sentence. It's a historical novel based on a certain location. And I was describing a trail, a path around the hillside. And I wanted there to be kind of a curve there for poetic reason. And I immediately started Googling, because this is the journalist, if there isn't really a curve in there, I can't do it. I started Googling to see if I could, and then I started off. Thank you, sure. Your whole journalistic training is against making stuff up. So I'm having to unlearn this and revel in imagination. It's almost unethical. It's a bit like a cigarette. You just make that up. I've got to unlearn all of it. So he's been lying for years. But I have new admiration for like Jeffery to do this. It'll be very easy to read, but it's difficult. You get these waves of insecurity walking over you like that. Yeah, this is rubbish. And I promised myself, because frankly, most of my journalist friends who write novels do not do it well. Because they fail to dramatize. They fail to create characters. They tend to report. That's what they're good at. And I promised myself that I'm going to finish this one, but if it's rubbish, I'm just going to rip it up, like James Joyce throwing it in the fire. Hopefully my wife will rescue it. And not do it again.
I've actually finished my 11th novel. I actually finished it last year. And I'm working on my 12th and 13th one simultaneously. Actually, whenever I encounter writer's block, I kind of jump from one book to another. So at any time, I might be working on 2 or 3 different stories. Someone asked me if I'm going to write a sequel to Bureau 39, and that sort of put the idea into my head. And actually, in the novel itself, there are a few loose ends that could be explored. So I might have 2 or 3 stories that will follow this one. So I keep busy. My only problem is that I have 4 children at home. So when I'm chasing and running after them, trying to get them to go to bed at 9 o'clock, that's when Daddy can write. So after I do a full day of teaching and then chasing the kids around the house until 9 o'clock, usually around 10 or 11, that's when I'm able to write. So I do most of my writing when everyone else is sleeping. So I'm just happy to be able to figure something. But it keeps me busy. And actually, my second oldest son, I dragged him down from Asia to come here so to experience something like this. But yeah, that's what I'm working on. And also working on promoting this book. One of the things about being a writer is that we are in the business of promoting our own works and trying to promote to market. And these days, I'm an indie writer. Okay, I'm a self-published writer. I don't have a publishing house that's taking care of everything. So basically, I'm doing everything. I'm writing. I'm hiring someone to edit. Hiring someone to do the cover design, working on that, and then I'm also in the business of promoting it and trying to actually get it out for people to read. So I find, I'm really getting off topic here, but I find one of the challenges of the writers is actually trying to promote one's work after you finish writing it. And it's really difficult these days because most of nowadays anybody can write a book. Anybody that's got a computer can write a book, upload it to Amazon. In 48 hours, you're a published writer. And the market itself is getting so saturated with so many people writing. And I watched this since 2010 when I published my first book, how saturated the market is. So I find myself, writing and spending that other extra time. I'm not chasing my kids around, trying to find people, trying to find ways to promote my books. But I love what I do. Okay, so I don't want anything else in my life except this.
The policies to Michael and John, I'd like to follow up on that, Jeffrey. You've been in a unique position here as a fiction writer. Your own novel writing or fiction writing process. If you could talk a little about that, how you continue a project and finish a project. Where do you start with? Do you start with a plot? Do you start with characters? Do you know where you're going? Do you know how it's going to end? I know writers have different methods and
it always begins. It was a dark, stormy night. That's how I began. No, it was a dark, stormy night. The writing process, that's a really good question because sometimes it's a newspaper article that I might come across or a news story. This novel actually was based on, it was a story in 2013. Former Army Ranger was arrested in Phuket, Thailand, along with some Russians trying to smuggle 100 kilograms of methamphetamine that was produced in North Korea. And it was from that news article that this book actually the story itself was about something else, but once I read that news article, that was sort of the direction. The last book I finished, it's called Sinkhole. It was a news story about a home in Florida. I forgot how many years ago. Somebody was in his house, and his house was swallowed by a sinkhole. He was in the bedroom sleeping. So some of my stories would come from newspaper articles or something that I read. But the writing process, I used to be a film major. Many moons ago, I was a film major. And when I begin a book, I always see a movie. I'm always seeing scenes. I'm seeing the beginning of the movie, I'm seeing the end of the movie, or the beginning of the book, the end of the book. And I kind of storyboard my novels. I kind of have these ideas, and I start very rough storyboards, and I'll collect photographs, and I'll put these sketches up on the wall in front of my computer. And that's how I begin. And it's the combination of the articles I read, of the stories. It's this sort of this cinematic sort of background that I have. So a lot of people, when they read the books I've written, they say, "Wow, this would make a good movie." And I'm like, "Well, that's because probably saw it as a movie when I was writing it. So whether or not that has some bearing on my writing. And then the writing process, I teach writing, and one of the things I tell my students is that writing is easy, revision is hard. Because one thing when you write, you always have to rewrite. And for me, the revision process, this is the discovery process. And the one thing I really enjoy about writing is that it is about discovery. Because no matter if I have some idea in my mind or if I see this movie, usually by the time I'm finished with that book, it's not what I originally intended. Because it's always a journey for me. And there's always going to be twists and turns. And sometimes there's going to be a lot of dead ends. I'm going to have to back up and start all over again. But it's a process, and it's revision, and it's sort of this process of self-discovery. Sometimes I have these like little eureka moments when I'm writing, and suddenly I go, wow, I didn't think about that before. That's really interesting. And I get all excited, and I try to finish it. You know, and one thing which I started to do recently is I grew up with a typewriter. I grew up with a legal pad and a typewriter. And recently, I've gone back to my roots of writing out my entire novels by hand. There's really something about sitting down with a legal pad and starting to write. I love the feel of a pen in my hand and the ink going onto that page. This, for me, writing is creating. So I've gone back to the legal pads and the ballpoint pens, and it's so liberating to be actually away from the computer, because these days with a computer, I might write for 5 minutes and go, oh, let me check my Facebook. So I'm on Facebook, and then I go, oh, let me see, email. I got this CNN update. So I find myself not writing as much, but once I remove myself from the computer, suddenly the flow of the ideas is much easier. And if I make a mistake, I just cross it out. I don't go back and have to, hit backspace and then try to correct it. So just cross it off and keep on writing. So writing in that sense is very liberating. So a little bit of the process.
Thank you. Sorry, a little sideline on fiction avenue there.
Thank you for asking.
Something that's sort of unavoidable these days, the past several months, of course, North Korea, very hot issue, perhaps hopefully will become literally very hot, either there or here. But perhaps unfairly, it's kind of pushed out almost everything else, at least in terms of foreign media. But no doubt, any of us who've been home this summer, it's all anybody wants to talk about or ask about. And given your expertise on the peninsula, I'd like to ask sort of a 3-part question about the current state of affairs, and you can take any or all parts of this. What will happen? What should happen? And how nervous are you these days?
What will Donald Trump do? What should happen?
Well, I can be very brief on that. I don't really, North Korea really concerns me in the writing that I do. The question of, is it safe? What's going on? From the perspective of someone who's thinking about living in South Korea, what's the deal? Am I going to die? I'm cautiously optimistic, although I like everyone a bit on edge. I don't think anything's fundamentally changed in North Korea. But again, I'm not speaking as a North Korea expert. The question that really concerns me that I have to deal with is, is it safe to live in South Korea? Am I going to have to worry about this every day? My answer is still no. I don't think you need to feel threatened, but I think you certainly have to be concerned and have to follow the news. But I'm still here, so that kind of means something I suppose. If I really worried about it, I suppose I would be in a concrete bunker or something hiding, but I'm not. So actually, Steve, you pointed out one of the things that was actually one of the oversights
I think in my book, and this is actually kind of telling because I generally I don't worry about North Korea. I think about it, I read the news, but I don't worry about it. One of the things you pointed out to me, which I hadn't really occurred to me, is like, you know, you don't really mention North Korea, and you know, keeping in mind this is a book for people who are thinking about living in South Korea, and that's one of their big questions, you know, that they ask me all the time, and I don't really address it. So it is an oversight on my part, but it also tells you something about, you know, the level of my own personal level of concern about it.
Well, I realize talking to an audience of people who live in Busan, you're looking at somebody who lives in central Seoul, right by the Blue House. You must think I have nerves of steel. I'm a real hard man. What should happen, what will happen, how nervous or scared I'm nervous. I'm not that nervous. And that could be because I'm stupid. I have a horrible track record of predicting the wrong things on business. And I predicted the moon day with the last election. That's about the only thing I've ever got right. I think first what should happen is this is my simplistic view of things. The issue right now is North Korean nuclear weapons. To me, this is not really the real issue. It's obviously a great concern to the US because as each state is allowed to get away with it, 60 China, India, Pakistan, Israel, each state is allowed to get away with it. The nightmare scenario 50 years from now is that every single state in the world has these weapons, and believe me, some nut job. If ISIS got hold of weapons or any of those sort of people, they could use them by now. So this is a very, very serious thing, I understand. But the real situation with Korean nuclear weapons is this. And I think both North and South Korea are sort of guilty of this. You have two states, they're both United Nations members, which claim that the other state belongs to them. Now, in the South Korean constitution, North Korean citizens are South Korean citizens. That is a very, very aggressive thing. In the North Korean Workers' Party constitution, they're committed to recovering the South by whatever means possible. This is their commitment. This is what their objective is. This is a very, very unfortunate situation. It means that this issue is not going to go away. What I think, the way I look at it is, like it or not, human beings have found a formula. So far, the best formula that we have found for living together in our groups is free market democracy, which is law-based, and within which religion is put to the side of private choice. Simple thing, democracy. I think the whole world is going to go democratic eventually. There are countries who fight against this. There's a big view in Asia that democracy is a Western thing. No, it's not universal. But there's a strong thing in China, Singapore, places like that to justify dictatorship. So in my opinion, when I look at a country like China, I see South Korea as a country of Taiwan. And I think they're going to have their moment of democratic. North Korea is like a country owned by China and Mao Zedong. It's not even started yet. So the next leadership there will probably be a kind of Park-Chung-hee type. There'll be a lot of different government, but eventually they'll become a democracy. When that happens, I think when two countries share the same values, if they still want to, they can use them. Right now, my advice to South Koreans would be, for the sake of peace, let go of unification. Take it out of your constitution. Don't let it be a national objective. Because if you still have unification as a national objective, you're going to get upset. If the Chinese move into North Korea and accuse influence there, people are going to be extremely upset. They shouldn't be. They are their own country. So what might happen when Donald Trump got elected, understand the audience in the United States from professors. I'm more of a liberal type person. My familiarity with America is more that urban liberal type view on science and all that. Even if they're a bit conservative or a bit liberal, it's that thing. So Donald Trump, I was appalled by this man. But I must say, when the day he got elected, because my main interest is Korea, I thought maybe they might just do something. And my hope is that he's ratcheting up the pressure. He's giving back, he's behaving like nobody is progressive. America does. Democratic leaders don't talk like that, but he is. Sit on this. And this is something that made them all think back on. It's not like everybody thought. And Trump maybe the first some kind of deal that settles this problem. But fundamentally, it won't be settled to everybody's satisfaction because that underlying conflict that temporarily might get.
Okay, Mike, I agree with you about what you said about sort of the two Koreas, and I believe that if in the future there has to be some kind of regime change. I think that's one thing that a lot of people hope for is that I've heard people say like dropping cell phones across North Korea, so having them be able to listen to things in the South. So I'm very optimistic about that's what I hope will happen. As far as being scared, I recall the 1994 nuclear crisis, and I think that was a really scary time on the peninsula because we did not have CNN, we did not have the internet, we did not have a 24-hour news cycle. We had to rely on everything that was perhaps 2 or 3 days old, like the Korea Times or the Korea Herald or Stars and Stripes. So when the North Korean minister said that they were going to turn Seoul into a sea of fire, I mean, people were scared. I was teaching at Yonsei University at the time, the Foreign Language Institute, and there were, which we also shared a building with the Korean Language Institute. And I recall there were embassies telling their students who were studying Korean to go back home. So for me, that was really a time when it was really dicey on the peninsula. But since then, I know when people said, well, we've been down the same road so many times before, it's like the little boy who cried wolf, like, okay, how many more times is this going to happen? But, living in Daejeon, I'm still very close to Seoul. So, and I have family here. And I think about that all the time. Like, what will happen? Should I get my family out, in the next plane, will I continue to stay here for how long? So, in that regard, I try to kind of, I'm aware of it, but I try not to let it sort of seize every day of my life. I do watch the news more, and sadly, I have a CNN app on my telephone, and every night when I hear a little buzzing or a light flashing, and I go, oh my gosh, what has Donald done now? And I really sometimes, or sometimes, another missile has been launched or something. So, yeah, there's a fear which I think is sometimes generated by the media. I think the 24-hour news cycle, and I think sometimes there's a lot of misinformation that gets out there. A lot of people sort of think it's really what's happening. So in that regard, I just try to, remain very optimistic. Hopefully that there will be a very peaceful resolution to the situation.
Ask one more question, and then I think we'll have a Q&A time. This is sort of a two-part question. You can answer both or either as you wish. What you could choose one Korea to change? What would it be? Or if you could export one thing back to your home country that you think is wonderful, what would that thing be?
change. I think it's this custom of toilet paper and plastic. What would I change? The thing I like to export to my own country is this sort of sense of going somewhere. I know that a lot of young people today are getting frustrated, they're overeducated, can't get jobs. The Korean equivalent of dropping out. There are young men, my brother-in-law, everybody's consternation, but no interest in dating, but no interest really in working, because he's in his early 30s. But by and large, one reason this is such an issue that creates so young, creates so frustrated is because they're very focused ambitions. You know, you meet some year-old playing violin, they already want to go to Juilliard, greatest violins in the world. I think that's in my country. I think America, a lot of you Americans, the European Americans are very optimistic people. But in Europe, in my country, something like it. I told you earlier I wanted to be a writer. I never told anybody. Instinctively, I had to keep myself. Because I know in my culture, if I sort of said to my family or to my friends, when I grow up, what do you like to do? What do you do? I want to be the Prime Minister. You know, there's this sort of, you're going to be a school teacher, okay? And I love to export that sort of personal ambition and sort of a collective desire to go somewhere. I don't sound too fabulous, but I've always found that very inspiring living here. What would I change? What I'd like to see is I'd like to see Korean democracy become more of a law-based democracy, which is endlessly frustrating to me. That I think again, this might sound a bit nebulous, but the state of Korean democracy right now is the authoritarian leadership has moved out, some version of the people has moved in. And so the establishment, the judiciary and the parliament and so on, and the officials, when people speak, they feel they have to respond. And they even bend the law to do that. We might talk later about Park but I wish Korean democracy were more strongly law-based and not sort of people passion-based.
That's something that, speaking of the law-based, one of the things that affects me most directly, the driving, I wish driving were a bit more law-based. That's the thing that personally affects me the most. It's like cross the street. We all cross the street every day. That's my one great fear. When people ask me, in fact, are you afraid of North Korea? I say, no, I worry more about the taxi drivers and the bus drivers. Half joking, but I would change that. I would of course, have to be better. And I have to say, it's improved somewhat. There's been a noticeable improvement. The thing I would export along similar lines, one of the things I've always admired about Koreans is this desire to improve and this real belief. I think there's a real core belief is perhaps a legacy partly of the Confucian emphasis on education, as well as I think there's a role for the Buddhist tradition that teaches you that enlightenment is possible through continual self-improvement. But they really buy into, on a very fundamental level, this idea that education really makes you a better person. And there's just intrinsic value to self-improvement. And, it doesn't always survive the pressure cooker of school. A lot of kids have that jump right out of them. They get that pressure, and I get it. But you do see it. It does survive in a lot of people, a lot of adults, middle-aged people, even kids, this buying into this idea that you can make yourself a better person by learning and studying, and that knowing things is actually cool. That doesn't make you a nerd. I really like that idea. Maybe it does make you a nerd, but Maybe nerd, it's cool to be a nerd. But I really like that idea. If I could maybe explore something, that would be it. I had a rough time in middle school, you know, I was trying to lower my scores a little bit to be more popular. And if I had grown up in Korea, who knows, I might be a prime minister by now.
Who are you?
Well, yeah, I'd like to, I agree with what Mike and John have said. Of course, what I would explore, I would agree with the same things. One thing that I notice as an educator, especially when it comes to teaching writing, is trying to help my students to understand the idea of critical thinking. Because a lot of times when they're going through sort of middle school and high school, they're just trying to pass tests to graduate. So their critical thinking skills, when I get them as a university student, they have a really hard time with that. So in that regard, I think that's one of the things I think they should still be sort of focused upon, sort of the educational system. I think that's still, you know, even though Koreans pride themselves, of course, on education, a lot of times it's just trying to finish a task. You know, even my children, when they're in elementary school, they get rewards for you know, finishing a task. But when you ask them, well, what did you just do? And they, well, I'm not really sure. But I finished the task. That's what you want me to do. So I think it's understanding sort of this is part of, you know, the education system. And also about the law-based democracy, especially crossing the street, things like that. It's still quite dangerous, you know, and I just wish people would sort of, you know, trying to obey the laws and all that. I still can't figure out when you're crossing the street, when you have the green light, cars keep on still turning very well to cross the street. I still can't figure it out. But those are the things that I would change and things that I would export to my country.
All right, audience, have at it. John, Michael, and Jeffrey.
My question for Mr. Breen. Years ago, you had some trouble with the Samsung Corporation about liking one of your satire articles. The libel and slander laws in Korea, even if what you say is true, if it's deemed as damaging someone's reputation, you can't get in trouble for it. Do you think this is ever going to change in Korea? Ever going to change that?
I mean, I hope they do. I mean, you know, some of my own country has really horrible life. In fact, a lot of Europeans go to Britain where it's super life. But yeah, you're right. You highlight the very odd feature of Korean defamation, which is that let's say I write an article saying, let's say you just come out of prison because you robbed the bank or something. If I write an article about you say this guy robbed the bank, you can sue me, damage, you know, they can calculate how much damage, like you lost your job, deadline. And that's very, very hard. Will it be changed? I'm sure, you know, everything changes in Korea. And I think this is the information that I suspect that one of the several issues starts to get resolved. There'll be a big impact to laws like that. I expect it to change that.
The journalist can claim or have to claim that the information that they're talking about.
You know, to be honest, I forget what the defense is. I'm not sure. You know, journalists, if you're sort of a chosen elbow writer, you've written something that channel doesn't like, it's much more difficult than to sue you. If you're a small fry, the so make it much more vulnerable because it's somehow the chosen elbow that is seen as something. I'm not sure the legal distinction that I get, but basically truth is what it's meant to be.
Yes.
Just really kind of following up with that, does that lack of, you know, journalistic or lack of coverage of channel has anything to do with like Gijan club, the reporters clubs that are, you know, kind of a leftover from the
Park Chung-hee and Chun Yuan era where access to the government was given through these associations of major news, all the major news outlets in Korea. And if you were to report something against the government, you lose access. And I'm not sure about, I haven't really been following these clubs, but I'm wondering if that also doesn't apply to the chaebols and major industry as well, like this association of top tier. That's kind of why you don't see a lot of disparity in the way or the views taken by different media. Whereas we have, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are completely opposed, usually politically opposed, but you don't see that as much in Korea. I think that has something to do with it. I wonder if it also figures into the.
I think, yeah, it's connected. There's slightly different issues. The key to that, the key to what you're referring to is the way a news rules in the South Korean newspaper structure is that it's often structured by a beat. If you're the defense beat, the beats used to be defined by government ministries, and you can add a report of the assassination and you do something like that. And so what you're designing is a system where, when you say, if you're in an American newspaper and you are a defense reporter, you will work either from your newspaper office or from home or Starbucks, wherever it is, and you go to the Pentagon, you go to a defense company to talk to analysts, you go. In Korea, you're based out of the defense ministry press group. So there's an inherent sort of bias there. You're getting fed press releases from the ministry. You don't contacts you don't like to burn. You really get to burn contacts. The odd thing is, the reporters in these clubs from different newspapers feel themselves to be colleagues. Their rivalry is with newspapers with reporters on their own newspaper. So if you're on the business desk of the newspaper, if you're one of 10 reporters on the business desk, let's say you're assigned to Samsung, you'll see the rivals in other newspapers are also coming to Samsung, like your friends, probably. Your competition is back on your desk, where you're competing. So because of that very odd situation, there's sort of an agreement not to break scoop. And there are occasions, I've heard of occasions, I remember once hearing that a friend of mine who was covering foreign ministry, I had dinner with her one night, and she was a little bit late. I said, why are you late? She was so easy, not so easy. There's been some news, a story has broken to do with the foreign ministry. And she said the meeting was, we all agreed not to report it. So that's how I can come back in. So it's slightly different from the Chevron.
Can we get that brass back?
Say again?
Can we get down to brass back? Meaning like we're all living here on this peninsula, right? Right. So we're worried about the rest of the world is worried about some kind of nuclear Armageddon. Are they not? I've been to the States recently. They're all like, what the fuck? You're in Korea, you're from the north. Are you stupid, bro? I would be here for us.
Yeah, we already discussed that.
Okay.
Were you here, Rob?
Well, I think my question is kind of directed to Mr. Breen, Mr. Miller, but Mr. Bocskay can chime in. But we talked about this earlier. Broadly, I'm curious about your thoughts about the Park Chung-hee scandal. But more specifically, I'm kind of curious, how is it
that Park Geun-hye and Ms. Che are guilty of extortion at the same time that E.J. Young is guilty of bribery. I'm having a problem. I've had a problem trying to understand how, on the one hand, somebody's being extorted, at the same time they're bribing somebody. It seems like a sort of a fundamental, at a level of abstraction, it's a fundamental contradiction. So I was hoping maybe you might help me understand that better. Anything you wanted to say.
My office is Honolulu, so my writing day is Saturday, with all the demos on it. Also, I live about 300 yards from the blue house. I walk through the demos to go back home now. And all the demonstrators the last 9 months were all around the alleyways around my house, being up against walls and stuff like that. So, my wife, who used to be ice picture comedy, has now become rather pro.
Is that a bad thing? As a communist?
No, I think that's a good thing. She's sort of very pro. I'm sort of joking. She's very pro sort of no gun and all that stuff again. She's run over on the other side. Well, no, she's not become right. She's actually become feminist. Unlucky for you. Where am I going? The question is, I suppose the way they get around that is sort of collusion. In other words, the three parties conspire to do something illegal. The problem I have with all this is quite simple. Is that when you look at it in the States, when Watergate started, Nixon decided to preempt a impeachment process. It took 2 years. There's a process you go through. There's innocence and was proven guilty, all that sort of stuff, which Korea has as well. In this case, it took, 2.5 months to be impeached. 2.5 months in the National Assembly to impeach
A whole lot of protests.
Yeah. So the thing is that the original protests were over an issue about somebody that realized this president had a close friend.
Cushion show.
Yeah.
They found her laptop or some tablet.
And the tablet they found wasn't even hers. It wasn't even hers. It belonged to somebody who worked for Park during her election campaign outside speeches from there. It wasn't even, the court didn't accept it. So there was a big demo about this. Millions of people come out of the street and started writing a speech. And the National Assembly, seeing the way that we were they're impeached, they came out with a bunch of pretexts to impeach them. The Constitutional Court rejected all but one of the pretexts. She impeached because she colluded with her friend. Now, in your case, I'm finding if that's true or not. Wrong way around. So that's my take on this. I find it. I thought it was pretty practical. I think it's great to have a woman president. It's great we sort of married.
But don't forget, she was the daughter of a dictator, you know, and her.
That doesn't make her a dictator. She was
I agree, but still, like, she comes to my boss.
Well, that was a stupid mistake from the farmers people at the time. But I think the way they get to your question is the three parties glued together. But basically, my view of the judiciary in this case is that they're straining to find the legal justification to do what people want them to do, which is put them away for 2 years. They'll get past it pretty quickly. It will be open. I don't think justice was served. I think that's political justice is legally.
I think there's a I'm leaving right now. I'm leaving right now. I'm just gonna say one thing.
Cool.
There's a connection between the Saywall and George W. Bush. Okay?
And chemtrails too, I think. Yes, you're probably.
Why am I sitting up front?
All right. Yeah, my question is, it's actually sort of a two-part question, but it's for all. The first part is really for all three of you. The second part might be more for Mr. Breen, who, to my understanding, also does business consulting here in South Korea. So, you've all mentioned the law-based system, and we were talking about the Constitution, and how one of the problems here is both the South and the North believe the peninsula is all theirs constitutionally. So B.R. Myers has written that one of the fundamental misunderstandings here with people about the Koreas is that they're not actually separate ideologies in the way we look at the Cold War. The North is radical nationalism and the South is moderate nationalism. And so they're both feeding off the same type of ideology. I'll leave, that's the sort of the first part. What would you say to that comment from B.R. Myers? And on an extension of that, the second part is, we now have a president who has suggested his constitutional referendum will include an obligation for future governments to respect the 1994, 2000, and 2007 agreements, which speak towards confederation with the North, i.e. that the South Korean government will have to move towards confederation. There will be an obligation for future governments. So in that take, would you at this time be suggesting that foreign companies start to invest in Korea, knowing an election is coming up in the middle of next year, when Moon Jae-in might find more seats in parliament than he currently has?
I think Brian Myers' great contribution to understanding Korea is in his book Between His Race. He answered the question that comes to people for a long time: if you're good communists, why have they tried? He explained that both are communists. It's more Nazi. It's China, the race-based nationalism. And he's also characterized South Korea as kind of, and with North Korea like sort of like a retrospect. And I can see where that comes from, and I can see how in conversations with students and with South Korean, particularly some liberal or liberal extreme sectors, right now really talking about where to get understanding. But my perspective is slightly different. In that, if you ask yourself, if you ask, try this test, ask a Korean, what are the values of this country? They'll probably say, well, the race, like nationalism, but they'll see what Ryan talks about. Nationalism, filial piety, friendship, loyalty, all this kind of thing. But I would argue that this is what they learned at school. These are old values. South Korean values now. People ask themselves, why do these people demonstrate out in the street? They're demonstrating about justice, fairness, abuse. They have democratic values. This is their democracy, and they're not going to lose it. And if the North Koreans think they can keep it weak, it's because their posture is a little bit, well, let's fall through, let's not look it up, and America is Trump. These people here will destroy them. They push the rule. They'll permanently back what they deeply hold to be true and what they value. I disagree in that. I don't think South Koreans are articulating to their children their values and their democracy. This is what we can
It was about if future governments are obligated to follow Confederation, then.
Well, let me let John go. What I would say is I'll sort of answer that by skirting it slightly, which is that we were talking earlier about should we be afraid of the change. I think we're going to be afraid. If, as a result of this tension with North Korea, the US enters talks with North Korea, and the result is some kind of free or peace treaty where there's, I don't think this will happen. I mean, the peace treaty might happen. I don't think I can say will happen. But if somehow the US no longer commits to defending South Korea, that's something to happen. Because I think the use of weapons is intended to be used. They sound a bit extreme, but I'm getting it to the result. But and I'm not sure how fully I believe this, but this guy's view is to effectively the British Embassy, the Green Embassy in London. Yeah, it is right. He said, you actually do the reference to Japan, you one here, one there, and you shell-shock the country you visit, take over. He thinks the North Koreans now realize there will never be a revolution. They haven't given up their view of taking over. So the nuclear weapons are intended to be used, but they're not going to be used against America. They're not going to be used against Japan. They're intended to be used against South Korea. They're not intended to help the regime survive. They're intended to push a unification I think the Confederation thing is all well and good. It's fine. It's all part of South Korea's commitment to peaceful cooperation.
Can I just interrupt you at the bar? Can I get a pale ale, please? Power the microphone.
I just wanted to add one point. I didn't have anything to add to the Federation. There was the question of nationalism, hardcore versus what we call moderate.
Well, B.R. Myers called it moderate nationalism.
Citing B.R. Myers. I read his book, as you know, and I agree that race-based nationalism. I worked there. There's a phrase I picked up. My only contribution to this conversation recently, I've heard South Korean nationalism described as a laid-back nationalism. The phrase that I kind of like. If you think about it, I'm kind of more inclined to think. But I see some people kind of smirking. It came up in reference. I could probably explain to. There's this new television program. I forgot the name of it, where they take three foreigners like from a country and they sort of expose them to culture. I know radical new idea, right? But this one's a little bit different in that they're not. In the past, those shows were all about sort of taking people and sort of promoting a certain aspect. And here's what we want you to know about Korea. Here's what we'd like you to take away from Korea. Whereas this show's angle is more like they're just sort of kind of throwing them out there and getting what's, to my impression, more sort of honest feedback. There seems to be more of a genuine interest, like an underlying knowledge that, okay, we know this is kind of cool somehow, people like this, but we want to know sort of what people think. So it was a step toward what they were referring to, sort of a laid-back nationalism, a confidence and a pride in the culture that was obvious, but it was a little bit less, in your face. Like, here's, Korea, and take all this, what we want you to know about the country. So maybe that's, I don't know. It was the only thing I really wanted to add to that.
And first of all, I'm a long-time resident of Korea and studying Korean history and so forth. Korea has always been a country of duality, and it affects every part of Korea on every scale. So, North Korea and South Korea is the obvious one, but within South Korea itself, you're going to have two distinct groups that are always trying to get each other back. So, throughout all of the presidents, from even Park Chung-hee, after Park Chung-hee shot, right? But then you have Chun Doo-hwan and right? So you have, and they were jailed by the next president, and then the other president, his son was attacked because of that, and then it goes on. Every time you change your president, they go back and they attack the old president and get back, and then they steal and do the same thing that the other guys are doing. And that's the repetition here. How much of that do you think is the reason for like Lotte, their attack suddenly on Lotte? You know, because Lotte is a Korean family that's based in Japan. So they made them say, is this a Japanese company or is this a Korean company? And they're trying, they took away a lot of their rights for tax-free stores and so forth. How much do you think this is getting back at Japan for not doing things that Korea wants them to do?
You talking about the last stage when it broke up? It's all right now.
Yeah, well, it's a continuation. You know, it's they never attacked the Lotte before.
Well, no, I think I'd say I don't. Maybe wrong. Yeah, that point of view of the attack on Japan per se. I think Lotte was its own worst enemy. It's an internal battle between the 90-year-old farmer and his two sons fighting the Japan-based son and the Korea-based son, fighting became a media issue and becoming very the media the evil public sentiment required government action. So I think, and then the Lotte group went into overdrive to protect themselves. One strategy was offering a golf course to a man without grant access. Another was breaking a giant Korean flag outside of the new building. But I think on that thing, society, it's been typical and it's continued through democracy, democratic administration, where the incoming administration conducts anti-corruption by the previous administration, which traditionally it's sort of a way of looking pure. You know, we're coming in pure-minded people, cleaning house, actually. And I think the underlying problem there is the power of the legislature is too great. There's too much power in the blue house, and so it actually leads to abuses. You know, I think in an American context, if Barack Obama, who had a close friend like Jeffery Miller, who benefited from her connection to Oprah. But it's sort of offended people here because there is so much scope for abuse. Yeah, if you're the best friend of the president, you know, like 4 times, you're going to be so tempted to people on the move. I think that's part of the problem. So I think what we've got now is discovered a new strategy here, protest by impeachment. I don't think it's what it turns out to be drive for people doing that.
That's the payback thing. Yeah. It just continues. One more, just a short question. How come North Korea is in the news all the time now, but none of the correspondents ever can say Pyongyang right? It's always Pyongyang. Why is that? Do you think they're deliberately not pronouncing the country right? I mean, there's got to be people that know it's Pyongyang, not Pyongyang. You know?
Michael, what's the capital of France?
What's the capital of France? I don't know. Capital of Germany, Berlin, right? You know why? I am American. No, but I'm just saying. But I mean, it's the difference is that this is, you know, in other countries and people just, you know, if you have some person's name, you try to make sure you got it and you get it right, even if it's a difficult name, a Russian name or an Indian name or whatever it is. You try to get that pronunciation spelling right. Especially in CNN, they do a lot of that for the dignitaries. But whenever they talk about North Korea, Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang, you know, like that. It's
Donald Trump is Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Anyway, that was kind of short. Thank you.
CNN, they call it the Hyundai Corporation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's partly Hyundai's fault. Because when they introduced Hyundai cars into the United States, they wanted to make it sound more like a Japanese car company. So instead of calling it Hyundai, they go Hyundai.
We're gonna have one more question, and then we will, get there. Anything else you want to ask, just, as we, come up and have a chat, buy a book, drink a beer, and,
Right, by the way, just so we can close it in, I didn't want to shut anyone off, but we're going to be around for a while too, so if you have any other questions, don't feel shy about it.
Just to clarify, I think Galte's golf course was expropriated. It wasn't
Oh, was it? Okay.
The government said we want it.
I'm curious on your take on education. We can all kind of find things to complain about, but what positive changes have you seen? And what's the forecast? Do you think the Sunum is going to be around forever? Do you think Korea will adapt for the 21st century economy?
Boy, 27 years in Korea teaching. The entrance examination, the students still studying early education. What is it? The last figures I heard, $1,000 for a month for each child. All the hogwarts every day. I take my children to elementary school, but also I see a lot of 2- and 3-year-old kids going to these preschools, these kindergartens. And every morning I see all the mothers taking the kids outside, and all the buses coming. And this is every day. And I think, in America, we never had that. We all went to kindergarten or I went to first grade, elementary school. And I've seen the education system getting better, but I think there's a lot of the old ways. And one thing I noticed that, parents will say when I teach them English, and now I'm teaching, their children English, and, I taught, their parents 20 years ago. They said, well, when I'm a parent, I'm not going to make my kids do that. And of course, when they become a parent, they're still going to make their kids take those classes. So I think it still has a long way to go. And I think in some ways it is getting better in terms of sort of the certain sections on the test. I see in terms of English, I know one thing is that whenever I saw the grammar sections on the test, I couldn't answer those questions. Thinking this is something that I would never teach students. Something I would never taught unless I was studying grammar or linguistics. So I think if they move away from that, more sort of I mentioned before, creative thinking, things like that. So maybe that will happen. But one thing I noticed too is that I teach an international business school, so I'm getting students from Korea, from China, from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia. One thing about the Korean students who come to my school, many of them, they have studied abroad. They went to the Philippines, they went to New Zealand, they went to Australia. So now we're seeing this generation of children who actually did not go through the Korean education system because their parents sent them to another country. So they're coming in, and their English and their sort of their ability is a lot different than it was the students I taught, say, 20 or 25 years ago. So if that answers your question, or I think it's still there's a lot that needs to be done, and I hope that that it will change. But just what I've seen, as an educator, I still believe that there's a lot of things that needs to be done.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Yeah,
that point? Is you talked about the Sunum, you talked about English education. It's big business here.
It is.
Now, Korea is one of the only countries in the world where they do things ass backwards, so to speak. When I was in high school, my teacher was a native speaker of French or a native speaker of German. And if I were to make, if they were to ask me to make a Korean education program for the New York public schools, and I got a group of professionals who have lived in Korea for 20 years, and they're all foreigners, and we include no Koreans, how good do you think those books would be? Not so good. That's exactly what's happening in Korea. When they make the Sunung and when they make the textbooks, no foreigners are included in the top decision-making process of the English education system. And when they send foreigners to schools to teach, they're at the bottom level. The Korean teachers have power over them. Tell them, no, you just teach
That's the question?
Yes. I just want to say, was that a question? I was just going to ask, do you think that this is going to change in the future, where they'll finally have, say, like, the only way to get rid of that, what you're saying, is to have people who really speak the language well write the damn tests and write the books for the students. So, I mean, I see that as a power play here in Korea, not that they really want to speak English well, but that it's a power play because English is such a big business. Do you think that the foreigners will ever get their say?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that it is, where the educators, and they're asked, sort of just to sort of come in and just sort of, be the monkey in front of the class.
Fill in the blanks.
Yeah, well, another thing too is even I've seen it in other areas too. Like, a classic example was during the 2002 World Cup when they tried to make World Cup one word. And I remember in the whole meeting, at times said, no, World Cup is two words. And it was just the fact that, it's just, we're going to hire people to do this sort of thing, and then, if somebody says, well, it's wrong, well, that's too bad. I've seen this happen a lot of times. It's just that, if you want to do something, so we hire experts, so people that are professional in that field, to do it. And that way you can avoid, sort of like you said, sort of roundabout way of doing things.
I think there's another way that I look at this here. I mean, I'm not an expert by any means, but one thing I do notice as a business here is I find there's great difficulty in this country. People have great difficulty assessing value. And I mean, let's say you've got 10 young people applying for a job in your country, your company. The human resources people have great difficulty assessing values. So what they do is they go by credentials. So if somebody's from Seoul National University and somebody else is from Busan National University, or let's say more obscurely University, the Seoul Day applicant will just get chosen simply because that's where they went. Now that happens in Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, that happens elsewhere. But I think this is beginning to change, and that it will certainly change if Chevron can get rid of the Chevron structure of the economy change. But when you're hiring, see what the Chevron have done traditionally is that they will take thousands of young people every year. As long as when the economy is going up 5, 6, 7, 8% a year, they will take thousands every year. Even if they were so, they take to the top universities, knowing they're useless, and they would then put them through their Chevron boot camp. And literally in the old days, like in the 80s, this was literally, say, the Samsung. Well, they would drop somebody in the middle of the countryside in Kamwongo with a rice cooker and say, you have to make your way back to headquarters on your own speed. So the person would have to sell the rice cooker. It's kind of like a semi-military thing. And then they would decide, okay, I know you studied engineering, but we're going to put you in human resources. I know you studied this, but we're going to put you in this stuff. That's it. And then they would start training them. That system is now changing, and they need people who have critical thinking and stuff like that. So they're coming up with ways to test it. The interview process is more profound than it used to be. I think this is partly behind the government sort of new thing where they're not allowed to request a photograph or CVs or even which university they're not allowed to ask that. So they have to decide which one candidates is the best candidate without knowing which university they went to, without seeing if they're busy or not.
But they find out beforehand anyway.
Yeah, secret side. So I think that's part of it. That when the demand changes, then we get
Thank you.
I'd like, let's give a round of applause to John Bocskay. Girls on the Rise, a really fun political thriller, as they say, ripped from today's headlines. It's got secret agents, methamphetamine, there's girls in it, right? Some girls. Yeah.
Just a round of applause for our moderator, Steve Feldman.
The Read the New Koreans is, I'm reading it, it's full of the really clear-sighted thinking and insight and intelligence that we saw on display this evening. And of course, John Bocskay with Culture Shock, Korea, buy it because he's a cool guy. So, have a beer, go to the chat, and any more actors, and thanks for hanging out.